"Okay," Henry said. "So now we're here." He was using his so-entertain-me voice, and he was cold but trying not to show it. Pete and I were cold too. We were trying not to show it either. Being cold is not manly. You look at your condensing breath as if it's a surprise to you, what with it being so balmy and all. Even when you've known each other for over 30 years, you do these things. Why? I don't know. Yep, I agreed. It wasn't my job to entertain Henry. Pete walked up to the thick wire fence. He tilted his head back until he was looking at the top 4 feet above his head, a 10-foot wall of tautly crisscrossed wire. Who's gonna test it? Well, hey, you're closest. Like the others, I was speaking quietly, though we were half a mile from the nearest road or house or person. This side of the fence, anyhow. I did it last time. A long while ago. Still, he said, stepping back. Your turn, Dave. I held up my hands. These are my tools, man. Henry sniggered. You're a tool, that's for sure. Pete laughed too. I had to smile, and for a moment it was like it was the last time. Hey presto, time travel. You don't need a machine, it turns out. You just need a friend to laugh like a teenager. Chronology shivers. And so, quickly, before I could think about it, I flipped my hand out and touched the fence. My whole arm jolted, as if every bone in it had been tapped with a hammer, tapped hard in different directions. Christ! I hissed, spinning away, shaking my hand like I was trying to rid myself of it. Goddamn Christ, that hurts. Henry nodded sagely. This stretch got current, then. Also, didn't we use a stick last time? Always been the brains of the operation, right, Hank? Pete snickered again. I was annoyed, but the shock had pushed me over a line. It had brought it all back much more strongly. I nodded up the line of the fence as it marched off into the trees. Further, I said, and pointed at Henry. And you're testing the next section, bro. It was one of those things you do. One of those stupid, drunken things that afterwards seem hard to understand. You ask yourself why, confused and sad like the ghost of a man killed through a careless step in front of a car. We could have not gone to the junction for a start, though it was a Thursday, and the Thursday session is a winter tradition with us. A way of making January and February seem less like a living death. The 2 young guys could have given up the pool table, though, instead of bogarting it all night, by being better than us, and efficiently dismissing each of our challengers in turn. In which case we would have played a dozen slow frames and gone home around 11, like usual, ready to get up the next morning feeling no more than a little fusty. This time of year it hardly matters if Henry yawns over the gas pump or Pete zones out behind the counter in the Massaquoi Mart, and I can sling a morning's home fries and sausage in my sleep. We've been doing these things so long that we barely have to be present. Maybe that's the point. Maybe that's the real problem, right there. By 8:15, proven pool fools, we were sitting at the corner table. We always have, since back when it was Bill's place and beer tasted strange and metallic in our mouths. We were talking back and forth, laughing once in a while. None of us bothered about the pool, but yes, a little bothered all the same. It wasn't some macho thing. I don't care about being beat by some guys who are passing through. I don't much care about being beat by anyone. Henry and Pete and I tend to win games about equally. If it weren't that way, then probably we wouldn't play together. Never been about winning. It was more that I just wished I was better. Had assumed I'd be better one day, like I expected to wind up being something other than a short-order cook. Don't get me wrong, you eat one of my breakfasts, you're set up for the day, and tomorrow you'll come back and order the same thing. It just wasn't what I had in mind when I was young. Not sure what I did have in mind. I used to think maybe I'd go over the mountains to Seattle, be in a band or something, but the thought got vague after that. But it certainly wasn't being first in command at a hot griddle. None of ours are bad jobs, but they're the kind held by people in the background. People who are getting by. People who don't play pool that well. It struck me, as I watched Pete banter with Nicole when she brought round number 4 or 5, that I was still smoking. I had been assuming I would have given it up by now. Tried once or twice. Didn't take. Would it happen? Probably not. Would it give me cancer sooner or later? Most likely. Better try again, then, at some point. Henry watched Nicole's ass as it accompanied her back to the counter. Cute as hell, he said approvingly, not for the first time. Pete and I grunted, in the way we would if he'd observed that the moon was smaller than the earth. Henry's observation was both true and something that had little bearing on our lives. Nicole was 23. We could give her 15 years each. That's not the kind of gift that cute girls covet. So we sat and talked and smoked and didn't listen to the sound of balls being efficiently slotted into pockets by people who weren't us. You walk for long enough in the woods at night, you start getting a little jittery. Forests have a way of making civilization seem less inevitable. In sunlight, they make you want to build yourself a cabin and get back to nature, get that whole Davy Crockett vibe going on. In the dark, they remind you what a good thing chairs and hot meals and electric lights really are, and you thank God you live now instead of then. Every once in a while, we'd test the fence, using a stick now. The current was on each time we tried, so we kept walking. We followed the line of the wire as it cut up the rise, and then down into a shallow stream bed, then up again steeply on the other side. If you were seeing the fence for the first time, you'd likely wonder at the straightness of it, the way in which the concrete posts had been planted at 10-yard intervals deep into the rock. You might ask yourself if national forests normally went to these lengths, and you'd soon remember they didn't, that for the most part a cheerful little wooden sign by the side of the road was all that was judged to be required. If you kept on walking deeper, intrigued, sooner or later you'd see a notice attached to one of the posts. The notices are small, designed to convey authority rather than draw attention. No trespassing, they say. Military land. That could strike you as a little strange, perhaps, because you might have believed that most of the marked-off areas were down over in the moonscapes of Nevada, rather than up here at the quiet northeast corner of Washington State. But who knows what the military's up to, right? Apart from protecting us from foreign aggressors, of course, and the terrorist threat. And if that means they need a few acres to themselves, then that's actually kind of comforting. The Army moves in mysterious ways, our freedoms to defend. Good for them, you'd think. And you'd likely turn and head back for town, having had enough of tramping through snow for the day. In the evening, you'd come into Ruby's and eat hearty. Some of my wings, or a burger, or the brisket, which, though I say so myself, isn't half bad. Next morning, you'd drive back south. I remember when the fences went up, 30 years ago, 1985. Our parents knew what they were for. Hell, we were only 8 and we knew. There was a danger, and it was getting worse. The last decade had proved that. 4 people had disappeared in the last year alone. One came back and was sick for a week in an odd and dangerous kind of way, and then died. The others were never seen again. My Aunt Jean was one of those. But there's a danger to going in abandoned mine shafts, too, or talking to strangers, or juggling knives when you're drunk. So you don't do it. You walk the town in pairs at night, and you observe the unspoken curfew. You kept an eye out for men who didn't blink, for slim women whose strides were too short, or so people said. There was never that much passing trade in town. Massaquoi isn't on the way to anywhere. Massaquoi is a single guy who keeps his yard tidy and doesn't bother anyone. The tourist season up here is short and not exactly intense. There is no ski lodge or health spa, and the motel, frankly, isn't up to much. The fence seemed to keep the danger contained and out of town, and within a few years its existence was part of life. It wasn't like it was right there on the doorstep. No big city reporter heard of it and came up looking to make a sensation, or if they did, they didn't make it all the way here. Life went on. Years passed. Sometimes small signs work better than great big ones. As we climbed deeper into the forest, Pete was in front, I was more or less behind him, and Henry lagged a few steps behind. It had been that way the last time, too. But then we hadn't had hip flasks to keep us fueled in our intentions. We hadn't needed to stop to catch our breath so often either. We just going to keep on walking? It was Henry asked the question, of course. Pete and I didn't even answer. At 10:15, we were still in the bar. 2 guys remained at the pool table. When one leaned down, the other stood silently, judiciously sipping from a bottled beer. They weren't talking to each other, just slotting the balls away. Looked like they were having a whale of a time. We were drinking steadily, and the conversation was often two-way while one or other of us trekked back and forth to empty our bladder. By then we were resigned to sitting around. We were a little too drunk to start playing pool even if the table became free. There was no news to catch up on. We felt aimless. We already knew that Pete was 10 years married, that they had no children, and it was likely going to stay that way. His wife is fine and still pleasant to be with, though her collection of dolls is getting exponentially bigger. We knew that Henry was married once too, had a little boy, and that though the kid and his mother now live 40 miles away, relations between them remained cordial. Neither Pete nor I are much surprised that he has achieved this. Henry can be a royal pain in the ass at times, but he wouldn't still be our friend if that's all he was. Same again, boys? You are thirsty tonight. It was Pete's turn in the gents, so it was Henry and I who looked up to see Nicole smiling down at us, thumb hovering over the repeat button on her pad. Deprived of Pete's easy manner, partly genetic, also honed over years of chatting while totting and bagging groceries, our response was cluttered and vague. Quick nods and smiles. I said thanks, and Henry got in a "hell yes" that came out a little loud. Nicole winked at me and went away again, as she has done many times over the last 3 years. As she got to the bar, I saw one of the pool players looking at her, and felt a strange twist of something in my stomach. It wasn't because they were strangers, or because I suspected they might be something else, something that shouldn't be here. They were just younger guys, that's all. Of course they're going to look at her. She's probably going to want them to. I lit another cigarette and wondered why I still didn't really know how to deal with women. They've always seemed so different to me. So confident, so powerful, so in themselves. Kind of scary, even. Most teenage boys feel that way, I guess, but I had assumed age would help, that being older might make a difference. Apparently not. The opposite, if anything. Cute, just don't really cover it, Henry said. Again, not for the first time. I'm gonna have to come up with a whole new word. Super cute, how's that? Hyper hot. Ultra... How about just beautiful? For a horrible moment, I thought I'd said this out loud. I guess in a way I did, because what pronouncements are louder than the ones you make in your own head? Pete returned at the same time as the new beers arrived, and with him around it was easier to come across like grown-ups. He came back looking thoughtful, too. He waited until the 3 of us were alone again, and then he reached across and took one of my Marlboro, like he used to back in the day when he couldn't afford his own. He didn't seem to be aware he'd done it. He looked pretty drunk, in fact, and I realized that I was, too. Henry is generally at least a little drunk. Pete lit the cigarette, took a long mouthful of beer, and then he said, "You remember that time we went over the fence?" The stick touched, and nothing happened. I did it again. Same result. We stopped walking. My legs ached, and I was glad for the break. Pete hesitated a beat, then reached out and brushed the thick black wire with his hand. When we were kids, he might have pretended it was charged and jiggered back and forth, eyes rolling and tongue sticking out. He didn't now. He just curled his fingers around it, gave it a light tug. "Power's down," he said quietly. Henry and I stepped up close. Even with Pete standing there grasping it, you still had to gird yourself to do the same. Then all 3 of us were holding the fence, holding it with both hands, looking in. That close up, the wire fuzzed out of focus, and it was almost as if it wasn't there. You just saw the forest beyond it, moonlit trunks, snow. You heard the quietness. If you stood on the other side and looked out, the view would be exactly the same. With a fence that long, it could be difficult to tell which side was in, which was out. This, too, was what had happened the previous time when we were 15. We'd heard that sometimes a section went down, and so we went looking. With animals, snow, the random impacts of falling branches, and a wind that could blow hard and cold at most times of year. Once in a while, a cable stopped supplying the juice to one 10-yard stretch. The power was never down for more than a day. There was a computer that kept track, and somewhere, nobody knew where, a small station from which a couple of military engineers could come to repair the outage. It had happened back then. It had happened now. We stood, this silent row of older men, and remembered what had happened then. Pete had gone up first. He shuffled along to one of the concrete posts so the wire wouldn't bag out and started pulling himself up. As soon as his feet left the ground, I didn't want to be left behind, so I went to the other post and went up just as quickly. We reached the top at around the same time. As soon as we started down the other side, lowering ourselves at first, then just dropping, Henry started his own climb. We all landed silently in the snow with bent knees. We were the other side, and we stood very still. Far as we knew, no one had ever done this before. To some people, this might have been enough. Not the three boys. Moving very quietly, hearts beating hard. Just from the exertion, none of us was scared, not exactly. Not enough to admit it anyway. We moved away from the fence. After about 20 yards, I stopped and looked back. Are you chickening out? No, Henry, I said. His voice had been quiet and shaky. I took pains that mine sound firm. Memorizing. We want to be able to find that dead section again. He'd nodded. Good thinking, smart boy. Pete looked back with us. Stand of 3 trees close together there. Unusually big tree over there on the right. Kind of a semi-clearing on a crest. Shouldn't be hard to find. We glanced at each other, judged it logged, then turned and headed away into a place no one had been for nearly 10 years. The forest floor led away gently. There was just enough moonlight to show the ground panning down towards a kind of high valley lined with thick trees. As we walked, bent over a little with unconscious caution, part of me was already relishing how we'd remember this in the future, leaping over the event into retrospection. Not that we'd talk about it, outside the 3 of us. It was the kind of thing which might attract attention to the town, including maybe attention from this side of the fence. There was one person I thought I might mention it to, though. Her name was Lauren, and she was very cute. The kind of beautiful that doesn't have to open its mouth to call your name from across the street. I talked to her a couple of times, finding bravery I didn't know I possessed. It was she who had talked about Seattle, said she'd like to go hang out there someday. That sounded good to me, good and exciting and strange. What I didn't know, that night in the forest, was that she would do this, and I would not. That she would leave without us ever having kissed. I just assumed. I assumed a lot back then. After a couple of 100 yards, we stopped, huddled together, shared one of my cigarettes. Our hearts were beating heavily, even though we'd been coming downhill. The forest is hard work, whatever direction it slopes. But it wasn't just that, it felt a little colder here. There was also something about the light. It seemed to hold more shadows. You found your eyes flicking from side to side, checking things out, wanting to be reassured, but not being sure that you had been, after all. I bent down to put the cigarette out in the snow. It was extinguished in a hiss that seemed very loud. We continued in the direction we'd been heading. We walked maybe another 500-600 yards. It was Henry who stopped. Keyed up as we were, Pete and I stopped immediately too. Henry was leaning forward a little, squinting ahead. What? He pointed. Down at the bottom of the rocky valley was a shape. A big shape. After a moment I could make out it was a building. 2 wooden stories high and slanting. You saw that kind of thing sometimes. The sagging remnant of some pioneer's attempt to claim an area of this wilderness and pretend it could be a home. Pete nudged me and pointed in a slightly different direction. There was the remnants of another house further down, a little fancier with a fallen-down porch, and 30 yards further another, smaller, with a false front. "Cool," Henry said, and briefly I admired him. We sidled now, a lot more slowly and heading along the rise instead of down it. Ruined houses look real interesting during the day. At night they feel different, especially when lost high up in the forest. Trees grow too close to them, pressing in. The lack of a road, long overgrown, can make the houses look like they were never built but instead made their own way to this forgotten place, in which you have now disturbed them. They sit at angles which do not seem quite right. I was beginning to wonder if maybe we'd done enough, come far enough, and I doubt I was the only one. Then we saw the light. After Pete asked his question in the bar, there was silence for a moment. Of course we remembered that night. It wasn't something you'd forget. It was a dumb question unless you were really asking something else, and we both knew Pete wasn't dumb. Behind us on the other side of the room came the quiet, reproachful sound of pool balls hitting each other, and then one of them going down a pocket. We could hear each other thinking it was a cold evening, and there was thick snow on the ground, as there had been on that other night. That the rest of the town had pretty much gone to bed, that we could get in Henry's truck and be at the head of a hiking trail in 20 minutes, even driving drunkard slow. I didn't hear anyone thinking a reason, though. I didn't hear anyone think why we might do such a thing or what might happen. By the time Pete had finished his cigarette, our glasses were empty. We put on our coats and left and crunched across the lot to the truck. Back then, on that long-ago night, suddenly my heart hadn't seemed to be beating at all. When we saw the light in the second house, a faint and curdled glow in one of the downstairs windows, my whole body suddenly felt light and insubstantial. One of us tried to speak. It came out like a dry click. I realized there was a light in the other house too, faint and golden. Had I missed it before, or had it just come on? I took a step backwards. The forest was silent but for the sound of my friend's breathing. "Oh no," Pete said. He started moving backwards, stumbling. Then I saw it too. A figure, standing in front of the first house. It was tall and slim, like a rake's shadow. It was 100 yards away, but still it seemed as though you could make out an oval shape on its shoulders, the color of milk diluted with water. It was looking in our direction. Then another was standing near the other house. No, two. Henry moaned softly. We three boys turned as one, and I have never run like that before or since. The first 10 yards were fast, but then the slope cut in and our feet slipped, and we were down on hands half the time, scrabbling and pulling, every muscle working together in a headlong attempt to be somewhere else. I heard a crash behind and flicked my head to see Pete had gone down hard, banging his knee, falling on his side. Henry kept on going, but I made myself turn around and grab Pete's hand, not really helping but just pulling, trying to yank him back to his feet or at least away. Over his shoulder I glimpsed the valley below, and I saw the figures were down at the bottom of the rise, speeding our way in jerky, blurred black movements, like half-seen spiders darting across an icy window pane. Pete's face jerked up, and I saw there what I felt in myself. It was not a cold fear, but a hot one. A red-hot meltdown as if you were going to rattle and break apart. Then he was on his feet again, moving past me, and I followed on after him towards the disappearing shape of Henry's back. It seemed so much further than we walked. It was uphill, and the trees no longer formed a path, and even the wind seemed to be pushing us back. We caught up with Henry and passed him, streaking up the last 100 yards towards the fence. None of us turned around. You didn't have to. You could feel them coming like rocks thrown at your head. Rocks glimpsed at the last minute when there was time to flinch but not to turn. I was sprinting straight at the fence when Henry called out. I was going too fast and didn't want to know what his problem was. I leapt at the wire. It was like a truck hit me from the side. I crashed to the ground, fizzing, arms sparking and with no idea which way was up. Then 2 pairs of hands were on me, pulling at my coat, cold hands and strong. I thought the fingers would be long and pale and milky, but then I realized it was my friends, and they were pulling along from the wrong section of the fence, dragging me to the side when they could have just left me where I fell and made their own escape. The three of us jumped up at the wire at once, scrabbling like monkeys, stretching out for the top. I rolled over wildly, grunting as I scored deep scratches across my back that would earn me a long, hard look from my mother when she happened to glimpse them a week later. We landed heavily on the other side, still moving forward, having realized that we'd just given away the location of a portion of dead fence, but now we had to look back. And what I saw, though my head was still vibrating from the shock I'd received, so I cannot swear to it, was at least 3, maybe 5 figures on the other side of the fence, not right up against it, but a few yards back. Black hair was whipped up around their faces, and they looked like absences ill-lit by moonlight. Then they were gone. We moved fast. We didn't know why they'd stopped, but we didn't hang around. We didn't stick too close to the fence either in case they changed their minds. We half walked, half ran, and at first we were quiet, but as we got further away, and nothing came, we began to laugh, and then to shout, punching the air, boys who had come triumphantly out the other side. The forest felt like some huge football field, applauding its heroes with whispering leaves. We got back to town a little after 2 in the morning. We walked down the middle of the deserted main street, slowly, untouchable, knowing the world had changed, that we were not the boys who had started the evening, but men, and that the stars were there to be touched. That was then. As older men, we stood together at the fence for a long time, recalling that night. Parts of it are fuzzy now, of course, and it comes down to snapshots. Pete's terrified face when he slipped, the first glimpse of light at the houses, Henry's shout as he tried to warn me. Narrow faces the color of moonlight. They most likely remembered other things, defined that night in different ways, and were the center of their recollections. As I looked now through the fence at the other forest, I was thinking how long a decade it seemed back then, and how you could learn that it was no time at all. Henry stepped away first. I wasn't far behind. Pete stayed a moment longer, then took a couple of steps back. Nobody said anything. We just looked at the fence a little longer, and then we turned and walked away. Took us 40 minutes to get back to the truck. The next Thursday, Henry couldn't make it, so it was just me and Pete at the pool table. Late in the evening, with many beers drunk, I mentioned the fence. Not looking at me, chalking his cue, Pete said that if Henry hadn't stepped back when he did, he'd have climbed it. And gone over? Yeah, he said. This was bullshit, and I knew it. Really? There was a pause. No, he said eventually, and I wished I hadn't asked the second time. I could have left him with something, left us with it. Calling an ass cute isn't much, but it's better than just coming right out and admitting you'll never cup it in your hand. The next week it was the 3 of us again, and our walk in the woods wasn't even mentioned. We've never brought it up since, and we can't talk about the first time anymore either. I think about it sometimes, though. I know I could go out walking there myself some night, and there have been slow afternoons and dry, sleepless small hours when I think I might do it, when I tell myself such a thing isn't impossible now, that I am still who I once was. But I have learned a little since I was 15, and I know now that you don't need to look for things that will suck the life out of you. Time will do that all by itself. Jamie Bamba was reading This Is Now, written by Michael Marshall Smith. It was directed by Martin Trickey and produced by Anne Kelly.